The execution order. The sound of hooves striking dry stone echoed through the narrow streets. Dust clung to the morning air like judgment. Crowds had already begun to gather at the square, where sentences were announced and blood often followed. I am Marcus Decimus Longinus, a seasoned centurion in the Roman army, stationed in Judea. I had been summoned early, not to suppress an uprising, not to hunt down zealots. This time, it was different. An execution had been ordered. Not just any execution. It was politically charged. Everyone could sense it. The name written on the wooden plaque, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. A bold accusation. A man claimed to be a king, with no army, no sword, and no robe of royalty. Only a rough tunic, stained in blood. His face bruised, his brow pierced. But it was his eyes that haunted me. No hatred, no fear, just something I had never seen in a prisoner. I've looked into the eyes of countless condemned men. Some begged, some cursed, most broke under fear. But not him. He stared back with a calm I couldn't explain. I was a soldier of the empire. I didn't believe in gods. We obeyed commands, not voices from the sky. When orders came, we acted. No hesitation. That's how Rome survived. That's how men like me rose through blood and grit. But something was off. When Pilate delivered the sentence, his voice trembled. He didn't bark it like usual. He turned his face, dipped his hands in water, and muttered, "I wash my hands of this man's blood." I didn't care. Politics, religion, prophets, they were all noise to me. I had nailed plenty of so-called saviors to crosses before. But there was something off. From the moment I let him out, I couldn't look away. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't a liar. And yet, he didn't defend himself. He walked, step after step, as if he'd already accepted the end. When I look back now, that order, that one order, it was the beginning of everything. On the road to Golgotha, people screamed. Some threw stones. Some wept. Some knelt and trembled. The man carried the beam on his torn back. Each step left drops of blood on the stone. I thought he'd collapse. I expected him to beg for mercy. He never did. Not a word. His lips tight, eyes forward. When he stumbled, I grabbed a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, to help carry the cross, just to keep things moving. But when I glanced back, Simon was crying. He had never met this man. Why was he weeping for him? The night before, I had a dream. I saw blood and wood. I saw my own hands swinging a hammer. With every strike, blood sprayed, then turned into light. No screams, no hatred, only a voice. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." I jolted awake, my chest tight, my forehead soaked in sweat. I don't believe in dreams. But something gripped me. For the first time in years, I felt guilt before I even acted. And now, standing before the cross, I held the iron nail, hammer in hand. The man lay before me, his arms open, waiting. His eyes met mine. No anger, no blame, only mercy. My hands began to tremble. I, a battle-hardened soldier, was shaking, not from fear, but from something I couldn't name. When I raised the hammer, my heart pounded like war drums. I drove the nail through flesh, and something inside me broke. Chapter 2. The face of a criminal who didn't look like one. The hammer echoed across the hill like thunder. One strike, then another. With every blow, I expected him to scream. But he didn't. Not a curse, not a cry. He exhaled sharply, like a man embracing pain, not running from it. Blood spilled freely, pooling at my feet. Yet his face remained calm, steady, resigned. I had broken many men before, some with whips, others with fear. But he broke me without lifting a hand. His silence screamed louder than any rebellion. I turned away for a moment. Behind me, a crowd watched in strange stillness. No chants, no cheering, just eyes, thousands of them, waiting for something they didn't understand. Beside me, 2 more were nailed, thieves, rebels. The usual lot. They cursed. They spat. But the one in the middle was different. Even the sky seemed to notice. Clouds began to gather. The midday sun faded. The air grew heavier. I tried to shake the feeling. Tried to remind myself, this was justice. This was duty. But duty had never felt so hollow. We lifted the cross. As it stood upright, I heard joints pop. Muscles tear. A groan escaped his lips, quiet and almost reverent. He looked down. Not with anger, not with fear, but with compassion. He saw us, me, and he whispered, "Father, forgive them." He was asking for our forgiveness while we murdered him. What kind of man does that? What kind of king bleeds and still prays for his killers? I stepped back, hands red, heart confused. The face of that man, bloodied, broken, still looked more royal than any Caesar I'd ever seen. He wasn't dying in weakness. He was dying with purpose. And I had no name for the feeling tightening in my chest. But I knew it wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something holy. Chapter 3, Under the Midday Darkness. It should have been the brightest part of the day, but the light vanished. The sun hid behind thick, unnatural clouds. A darkness fell, not just over the hill, but into my bones. I've fought through storms. I've marched through deserts. But this was different. This wasn't weather. This was morning. Even nature grieved. The wind picked up, sharp and dry. Dust blew across the hill, stinging our eyes. The crowd began to murmur. Some knelt. Some fled. Others just stared. One woman sobbed uncontrollably. She called him son. I looked at her. Her pain was unbearable. Yet she stood tall, like him. Like she knew this was the only way. The man beside me, one of the thieves, begged for mercy. But not from us. From the man we nailed to the center. "Remember me when you enter your kingdom," he cried. And through gasps of pain, Jesus replied, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." Who speaks of paradise while dying? Who promises heaven while bleeding? I couldn't answer. My world, everything I had believed in, was cracking, and the hammer I had used felt like it had shattered something inside me. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned my blade. I barked orders at the other soldiers. I avoided looking up, but when I did, he was looking at me. Again, eyes full of pain, but also peace. I had never seen that kind of peace before. Not in kings, not in generals, not in priests. Only here, on a cross, in a man the world called criminal. And the sky just kept getting darker. Chapter 4, The Final Breath. The air grew still, heavier than before, like creation itself was holding its breath. The crowd had thinned. Some had left in silence. Some stayed, paralyzed, not from curiosity, but from something else. Something sacred, something terrifying. I stood there, hands clenched. The blood on my armor had dried, but it burned against my skin, as if it knew whose it was. And then I heard him speak again. My God, why have you forsaken me?" The words pierced through the silence. Not shouted, but not whispered either. It was as if they carried the weight of all human sorrow, as if all the pain of the world had settled into that one voice. I had seen pain before, but never like this. This wasn't just the pain of nails and thorns. This was abandonment, loneliness, separation from something far greater than Rome or Caesar. And yet, there was no bitterness in it, only heartbreak. His breathing slowed, each gasp more shallow than the last. He looked across the hill, at his mother, at the thief beside him, at us. Then he whispered, "It is finished." I don't know why, but those words hit me like a blade. Not because he gave up, but because he completed something I couldn't understand. Finished what? His life? His suffering? Or something for us? Before I could think more, he spoke once more. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then he exhaled. One final breath. Long, soft, complete. His head fell. He died. But what followed wasn't silence. It was the earth itself that responded. The ground shook violently. Rocks split. Cries echoed across the city. Temples cracked. Even the veil of the sanctuary tore in two. Nature screamed, as if creation had just lost its creator. And I dropped to my knees. Not from fear, but from realization. I had followed orders. I had obeyed Rome. I had executed judgment. But I had crucified innocence. Holiness. God. I looked up at the broken body hanging above me, and through trembling lips, I said the only words I could form. Surely, this man was the Son of God. Chapter 5, The Silence After God Died. There is a kind of silence that does not bring peace. It doesn't soothe. It doesn't rest. It roars inside you. After the shaking stopped, after the veil was torn, after the blood stopped dripping from the wood, there was silence. But not the kind we knew. Not the stillness after war. Not the calm before dawn. It was the silence of the world without hope. I didn't move. None of us did. Even the other soldiers, men hardened by blood and conquest, stood frozen. No one spoke. No one barked orders. No one mocked anymore. It was as if the world itself had gone hollow. I looked up at him again. His body hung limp. His chest no longer moved. His face strangely at peace. I had watched thousands die, some violently, some defiantly, but never like this. He had surrendered, not just to death, but to something beyond death. I had nailed him there, but it was as if he allowed it, not with weakness, but with will, as if he bore something invisible, something none of us could see. Until now, a man named Joseph came forward, quiet, respectful. He asked for the body. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't loud. He wasn't political. He simply wanted to bury him. And Pilate allowed it, almost without question. Strange. A Roman governor rarely bends. But that day, everything bent, even steel hearts. I watched as they took him down from the cross, with trembling hands, with tears, with reverence. And again, the silence stayed. Thick, sacred, unbearable. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my quarters, helmet on the table, nails still on my belt. I stared at my hands. They were still red. I had washed them over and over. But the color remained. Not the color of blood, but the weight of it. I had killed many, but none had ever left a mark like this. None had ever changed the air around them when they died. None had shaken the earth. None had called me forgiven while I drove steel through their skin. Was I forgiven? Could a man like me be redeemed? Could hands like mine ever be clean? I didn't know. I still don't. But one thing was certain. The man we crucified wasn't just a prophet, not just a teacher, not a rebel, not a myth. He was something else, something eternal. And I had stood closer to God than I ever knew. Chapter 6. The day after redemption. I woke up before dawn, not from a nightmare, not from the clamor of soldiers, but from something missing. There was no trumpet call, no shouting orders, no sounds of training in the courtyard, only stillness. The kind that seeps into your bones and asks questions you've avoided your whole life. I sat up slowly. My armor was still there, cold, untouched. My boots were polished from the night before. The sword, sharp and ready. But I didn't reach for any of them. For the first time in 20 years as a soldier, I didn't want steel. I wanted silence. I needed it. I walked through the barracks alone, past rows of helmets, shields, spears. Everything looked the same, but I had changed. No one spoke to me. Maybe they didn't know what to say, or maybe they saw something in my face that scared them. I wasn't the same centurion they'd trained with, fought beside, obeyed. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. I found myself walking back to Golgotha, not by duty, not by command, just drawn. The hill was empty now. No crowds, no crosses, only flattened grass, bloodstains in the dirt, and the smell of something holy that still lingered in the air. I stood there, staring at the place where the middle cross had stood, and I whispered, "Who were you?" The question floated in the breeze. No voice answered, but something inside me did. I thought of his words again. "It is finished. Father, forgive them. Today you will be with me in paradise." Words no dying man should say, unless he wasn't dying the way we understood it, unless he was giving something, not losing it. I knelt where the cross had been, not because I planned to, but because my knees gave out. Tears came, not from weakness, but from weight. The weight of everything I'd done, the weight of everything he had taken, without vengeance, without fury, without defense, just mercy, undeserved, unmatched. I didn't pray. I didn't know how. Romans don't kneel to invisible gods, but I wasn't kneeling to a god. I was kneeling to a man who had become my savior. And for the first time, I hoped, not for victory, not for power, but for grace. Chapter 7. The whisper of the empty tomb. It began as a whisper, a servant in the market, two women running at dawn, a fisherman weeping outside a locked door. They said the tomb was empty. At first, I dismissed it. Another story, another myth, another tale that people used to keep hope alive. But this one wouldn't die. The rumor spread like fire in dry grass, not just in streets and alleys, but through the ranks of soldiers. Even the guards posted at the tomb had vanished. I found one of them, drunk, shaking in the back of a tavern. He wouldn't look me in the eye. His hands trembled worse than mine on the day I held the hammer. I asked him what he saw. He whispered, "Light, blinding," and then he was gone. I waited for him to laugh, to say it was a joke, a hallucination, a bribe, but he didn't. He just cried. Then came the others, men who once followed him, cowards who had fled, now walking boldly through the city, faces on fire. They weren't hiding anymore. They were preaching, shouting in the courtyards, declaring that the man we had crucified was alive, and something about their voices, the way they carried those words. They didn't sound like fools. They sounded like witnesses. I returned to the place one more time. The tomb. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I just stood at the entrance. The stone was no longer there. The grave clothes were folded inside. No blood. No broken body. No silence. Just absence. But somehow, it wasn't empty. It felt full. Heavy with meaning. Like he was still there. But not in flesh. In presence. I pressed my hand against the stone wall. It was warm. Not from the sun. From something else. And for the first time, I spoke his name. Not as a curse. Not as a prisoner. But as Lord. Jesus. The wind moved. Nothing more. But everything in me shifted. If death couldn't hold him, what else had I misunderstood? Was my strength ever truly mine? Was Rome ever truly supreme? Was I ever truly in control? The world had changed, and I had no sword to face it. Only questions, and a fragile, flickering hope. But it was real. More real than steel. More real than blood. Because the tomb was empty, and nothing else would ever be the same. Chapter 8. The man I tried to forget. I tried to return to routine. Orders, drills, marches, blades and discipline. The rhythm of Rome. I told myself it was just another day. Another cycle in the empire's machine. But nothing felt the same. Not the barracks. Not the armor. Not even the sound of boots on stone. Everything echoed differently now. Because I had seen something Rome could not explain. And it haunted me. I avoided the others. The ones who had stood with me on that hill. They avoided me too. Maybe they saw what I had become. Maybe they felt it too. The weight. The shame. The confusion. Or maybe they were afraid that believing what they saw meant admitting we were wrong. Every night I heard his voice again. Father, forgive them. It played in my mind like a song I couldn't silence. And when I closed my eyes, I didn't see war. I didn't see blood. I saw his face. Wounded. Broken. But somehow radiant. I tried to drown it out. I trained harder. Slept less. Drank more. But nothing erased him. Because you can't unsee mercy. You can't forget perfect love. One evening, I passed a child in the market. He looked up at me. Eyes wide. Innocent. He was playing with a wooden toy cross. He smiled. And I broke. I turned away quickly, heart pounding, breath short. That symbol, that instrument of death, it had become something else. Not just punishment, not just fear, but salvation. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had done my part, that what happened on that hill was behind me. But his story wasn't finished, and neither was mine, because every time I tried to forget him, he found me again, in a stranger's kindness, in a beggar's prayer, in a moment of silence too heavy for the sword to lift. He was everywhere, but most of all, he was in me. I had crucified a man, but I could not kill his presence. It lingered, like fire that warms instead of burns. I was still a soldier, but no longer roams alone. Somewhere in the cracks of my soul, a new loyalty had taken root, not out of duty, not out of fear, but out of awe. I tried to forget him, but I think he remembered me, and that was the beginning of grace. Chapter 9. The letters I never sent. I began to write, not for Rome, not for the generals, not for any report. These weren't orders. These were confessions, letters I never mailed, words I never dared speak. But somehow, putting them to parchment felt like breathing again. To the man I crucified. I don't know if you read Roman. I don't even know if you read these at all. But I need to write, because silence is killing me faster than any blade ever could. You looked at me with mercy, even as I held the hammer. You gave your life, while I followed orders. I told myself I was just a soldier, that I didn't have a choice. But I did, and I chose wrong. I remember the sound of your breath, the way you spoke peace in agony, the way you carried pain like it was part of you, not something to escape, but something to complete. What kind of man dies like that? And why does my soul feel lighter when I speak your name? To the thief on the cross, you were the first one to believe, weren't you? In those final moments, when everyone else mocked, you asked for a place in a kingdom no one could see. And he gave it to you. No sermon, no ritual, no sword, just a sentence, a promise, a new beginning in your last breath. You gave me more hope than I expected, because if you were accepted, maybe there's still hope for me too. To myself, you are not who you were. You can't go back. Not after what you've seen. Not after who you've seen. You've lived by blood. Now live by grace. You've fought for Rome. Now fight for truth. You've served Caesar. Now serve the one who never asked for service, but gave his life freely. I burned the letters after I wrote them. I don't know why. Maybe shame. Maybe fear. Maybe because I thought no one would understand. But their ashes stayed with me. They weren't gone. They were absorbed into the folds of my soul, into the memory of that hill, into the echo of his final words. It is finished. And maybe that's what these letters really are. Not a record of guilt, but the birth of belief. Not a report for superiors, but a whisper to God. I believe, help my unbelief. Chapter 10. The road I now walk. I left before dawn. No armor, no orders, no goodbyes. Just a worn cloak, a waterskin, and the weight of something new. Not guilt, not duty, but a quiet courage. The kind that doesn't shout, but steadies your step. I had spent my life marching for Rome. Thousands of miles under the sun, in sandals worn to the bone. For emperors I'd never meet. For gods I never believed in. But this road, this one, was different. Because I was no longer marching for someone. I was walking toward someone. I didn't know where the others were. Peter, John, the women who wept at the cross. I'd heard whispers they had gathered again, somewhere on the outskirts. Not hiding, but waiting. They said he had appeared. Alive. Not in spirit, not in dream, but in flesh. And somehow, I believed them. Not because it made sense, but because everything inside me had changed since the day I saw him die. You can't explain the shift. You can only follow it. Like a compass you didn't know was inside you. Along the road, I passed towns where no one knew my name. They saw a traveler, not a killer, not a centurion. And that was mercy in itself. Sometimes I spoke to strangers. Sometimes I walked in silence. But every step felt like worship. Like the dust beneath my feet remembered his footprints. I no longer feared judgment. I no longer feared death. Because I had stood beneath the cross. I had heard him forgive. I had watched him die. And I had begun to live. I still carry the nail. One of the ones I used. I keep it in a leather pouch, close to my chest. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. That grace found even me. A Roman. A soldier. A sinner. And so I walk. Not to atone. Not to impress. But to follow. To follow the one who died in my place. To follow the one I tried to forget, but who never forgot me. To follow the only king who ever bled for his enemies. This is the road I now walk. And I will walk it until I see him again. Not hanging on a cross, but standing in glory. The end of the old life. The beginning of something eternal.